In 2008, the Theatre Green leaflet was released, a document detailing about the carbon footprint of our industry and the steps we should take. And yet, here we are, 14 years later, with what to show.
So I'm Lucy Stokes. I'm the Managing Director of Race Furniture, and I am responsible for our strategy, our focus, and our sustainability.
Hi, I'm Sean Barkley. I'm the Group Sustainability and Environmental Manager for OC International, including Race Furniture. Came on the company 3 years ago and since have launched a sustainability strategy based on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and then have been implementing that ever since. It's been really interesting, I guess, to see how sustainability has increased so much in the past few years. I think it's really sort of taken off and everyone seems to be aware of it. Obviously, more recently with COP26, there's been a real shift and focus on carbon. And I think that sort of pressurizes down into what we should be all doing internally, where before we might have been looking at, we were looking at our carbon footprint, but more to do with scope 1 and scope 2. There's a real pressure on everyone to be calculating their scope 3 emissions. So when I talk about this, just to sort of simplify what that means, scope 1 and scope 2 are about your use of electricity and gas, your sort of direct emissions, and direct use of energy, which then can be converted into carbon emissions. Now, a lot of companies have become carbon neutral because they can offset this through various tree planting schemes or carbon avoidance schemes. But the change recently is to understand your scope 3 emissions. So that includes everything else sort of downstream and upstream. So looking at procurement, waste, employee travel and commuting. And we really need to understand our whole impact to then work out how we can be net zero. And as an organisation, we sort of signed up to and sort of committed to calculating our scope 3, but we haven't necessarily set a net zero target yet. And I think Lucy and I are very much aligned on, we don't want to set out a promise yet when we don't even know our impact. And actually, the reality of conducting this calculation is really difficult and quite complex and still sort of unknown. And I think since sort of the week after COP26, we're already being asked, okay, do you know your scope 3 emissions? And no, we don't, but we're on the journey for doing that. And it's very much different in that it's not just operational carbon, but it's embodied carbon as well. And I think that sort of brings us as to why we mentioned the Green Theatre leaflet report that was brought out in 2008 by the Greater London Authority. There's a huge focus in this document, 14 years ago, but about operational carbon and what we can be doing as an industry. And I think you can put all of those sort of tactics or guidance into every industry, but what it's missing and hinting at is embodied carbon. And I think that's what's the difference is now, and what we can really do as an industry to make a difference. But it really is down to our customers to making the right decision with our sort of guidance.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's really why we put forward the video that we've just put forward, which hopefully didn't shock many of you or did shock you, but in a good way. Because we, as Sean said, we are working towards understanding our scope 3 emissions. We already prior to COP, had as a group and as Race, we had sustainability focus. We always have done because we like to think that we're, social and responsible businesses. So we weren't certainly waiting for COP26. We were behaving in a responsible way anyway, but this has obviously given more focus. And there are a number of things that we can do as a business and certainly reduce our impact on the environment, because the environment is, it's our home. really have one planet, and we need to all really be looking after it. So we've looked at all kinds of things, and led by Sian and the great work that she's done and the rest of the team in terms of efficiency of materials, design, location of our supply base, less waste, the materials that we use and how we can reduce those materials, particularly looking at which, those of you familiar with the new Theatre Greenbook will see, the recyclable seating element, reusable seating element was an insertion made from the race team, which we're hugely proud of. And we think that actually where you've got an opportunity to recycle and reuse as opposed to have new, then we would actively encourage that's the way forward. Mainly because one of the biggest issues we have certainly in the seating industry, is that one of the largest elements of material that we use that end up in landfill is foam. So we have a huge focus in the business, and it was actually our head of design in conjunction with Sian early last year, and we actually shared this at the Future of Theatre Forum last year, around a new strapline which is form not foam, because we can use recycled steel, we use FSC wood, we already do all of those things, but there's nothing we can do about the foam. We can't stop that going to landfill. There's no control that we have over that material. So we looked at, actually, do you need foam? And comfort ergonomically comes from good design. It doesn't come from the lump of foam. That's a perception that we've all been taught over at least the last 100 years, that the thicker a cushion is, the more comfortable you're going to be. And it's actually not true. It's actually the other way around. And we commissioned an ergonomic study to help us prove and understand that. So we've actively looked at encouraging new designs, specifically working with task chairs, meeting chairs, sleeping chairs, wooden seats. The seats I'm sat on right now is no foam. It's formed to support the shape of my body, which actually is better for me, and then therefore better for the environment. So that's where we are in terms of a business, and that's one of, you know, a million things that Sian and the team and I are focused on. But it really starts with you guys as our customers, in terms of driving the decision and driving that change. And that's really why we've released the video we've released, because we need to work with you, and it needs to start with you, as in all of us as individuals. And I think that's really where, you know, Sian's talking about scope 3, and all of us as businesses will have to go through this process, but it's about how we collaborate together to get the best outcome.
Yeah, definitely. And I think whatever is measured, that's where we're going to start to be able to make differences. When we sort of see, okay, how shocking it is that we are sending X amount to landfill, or we're procuring X amount of steel that's not recycled, or foam, or whatever, until we actually know, what does that look like in carbon? And obviously that figure is not going to mean anything to us in a roundabout way, but we will look into what is that the equivalent of in terms of flights, and put something measurable in place. And I think procurement is obviously going to be a huge amount, and that's at the moment where companies can be carbon neutral, buildings can be carbon neutral. The challenge for buildings in the future that want to be carbon net zero, and having to understand, okay, what that actually means in terms of, look at all the materials you're procuring. It's going to be really difficult to become net zero unless you're doing things like refurbishment, where, for example, for race, like Lucy was saying, we can reuse the frames, the seats, and sometimes it is just the upholstery and essentially the foam that might need to be replaced. But then you have routes that maybe don't need to go into landfill. So you're dealing with the waste properly, and then you're just reupholstering the soft bits, but essentially all the carbon that has been locked in the seats and already been emitted in steel production, you're not producing that again. And so you can reduce that amount of carbon for that seat by, can't say the percentage right now, but we're looking into, can we provide that calculation to actually show you, obviously, you know, in terms of materials and volume, how much material you'll be saving. The question is, I guess, whether it's the data that we need to provide in the future for you to make those decisions. And that's definitely something we're looking into in terms of carbon calculations, which just whether the industry will demand that or not will be yet to be seen, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we as an industry, we see differences across. So as a collective construction industry, new build and refurbishment, there are different levels of I guess requirements and needs, and some clients are really stringent on, you know, they want everything to be environmentally accredited, and there is a push towards the focus, and others not so much. And what we would really hope the outputs of these sessions and these videos and talks and all of us collaborating are that actually as an industry that we become consistent, and it's not nice to have, and it's not a conversation or, you know, something that's asked for at the tender stage, but when it gets to costing, it's removed. This needs to be an everyday choice that we are making as human beings. You know, the same as we were joking earlier about, you know, we've made switches personally. You know, I'm using a deodorant that's completely natural in a plastic free, which there are others that are better, I'm sure, but, you know, we're committed to, from that level upwards, all of us as individuals are committed to making sustainable swaps and living our life differently. And that's the key for me. It's about being adaptable. And we can all show, you know, measurements and outputs and our carbon levels, but actually if it's not going to drive any change other than we are just telling you what we're measuring, then why are we all doing it? So for me, I don't think it's as important that we tick every box of, you know, COP26 or whatever the focuses are, or that the global leaders are asking us to focus on. I think what's really important is that we make true considered decision every day.
I think it's really interesting you say that as well, because I think with one of the things about carbon zero buildings is that will it then focus, sort of force companies to use low carbon materials, which if we're comparing a steel which can last 40 years versus a plastic which is so low carbon in comparison but will not last as long and could potentially cause a waste issue, is it going to force us to start using unsustainable materials because they're low carbon? And I guess there's an issue of there's a carbon issue now, but there was only sort of the fight against plastic with David Attenborough last year, which we seem to be forgetting if we're just going to push to low carbon materials. So I think it's really interesting. I think that's the thing with sustainability. There isn't one set sort of thing that you should be doing, and it's about conversation and collaboration and what works with you. And I think even something looking at fabrics, I think we've had the conversation, Lucy, before with fabrics. There's not one, again, band of or material fabrics that we should all be using, because there are different qualities which make it sustainable, whether that's longevity, sort of the carbon of it. But again, wool versus a polyester versus a recycled polyester will have very different carbon footprints, will have very different recycled contents. Like there's so many different aspects to it, but all of which should be considered, and actually these little tiny changes all collaboratively can make such a huge impact.
Yeah, I agree. And from an ethical standpoint as well, you know, we're looking into at the moment, we know that there are questions about the ethics of where certain cottons are produced at the moment and what's happening to the Indian farmers because it's all GMO, and so yeah, I think for us it's important that we make viable decisions that aren't, as you say, Sean, pushing us down a false sense of achievement. So, you know, plastic might have a lower carbon footprint, but absolutely we would not want to be encouraging the use of plastic. So I think it's about all of us being aware that none of us are experts. We certainly are not experts on this at all. We are really privileged to have a Sean in our business. We know that we're very privileged because not many businesses have a dedicated sustainability, you know, manager, and certainly not one as fab as Sean. So we are very privileged, but it doesn't make us an expert. We are trying to navigate this the same as everyone else. And really what we want to do is put the onus back on, as we said, it's you, it's us, it's a collective. The decisions we make every day, you might think that, you know, your decision to rip out the seats has no impact, but we're trying to demonstrate that actually it does have an impact, and we can help you make the right choice in terms of understanding for the wider planet and all the implications. As I said, we don't know the answers, but we really would like to genuinely work with all of you, all of our customers and our partners, to understand how we can make better decisions together. Because to watch the tons of foam that we see going into landfill, on a weekly basis is not something any of us should be okay with.
Yeah, and I think you're actually we're in a privileged position being in a bespoke industry where we can make these changes, where we're not a standardized product where we pump in, pump out. We can have these conversations with our customers, say, okay, what aspects can we amend, can we change to reduce our carbon, reduce the environmental footprint of our furniture, and where we can sort of help our customers also reduce their environmental footprint.
Actually, in terms of Sean, your last point, in order to one of the construction industry's biggest issues that they've had for years, and actually became quite a focus a few years ago, certainly around the national house builders, they drove it, but it's on all and filtered down to all construction sites, was to reduce the amount of waste each construction site produces. Because of the amount of product that's being delivered to any given construction site on a daily basis, you can imagine the sheer amount of packaging that gets built up on site. So Race, rather than contribute more so with packaging to a construction site, Race decided to look at it a different way. And so all of our seats are fixed down in the bed of the truck to stop them moving around, to stop damage, therefore negate the need for any packaging. So when we arrive at site, there is no packaging, there is nothing for our customers to worry about, there's nothing for them to dispose of, there's no skips needed, and there's no waste. And that, obviously, we know that not all businesses can behave that way, but that just gives an example of actually where we look through our whole customer journey and where we can help and where we can make a difference. And if just every one of us in our own businesses just did that, just one thing, we would have a huge impact on the world.
Definitely. And I think once you start to look at each department and sort of break it up like that, it seems like a huge task to start with. And then you break it down to these bite-sized chunks and you can work on all of them sort of collectively, and then your impact that you've made when you look back, okay, what have you done over the year? And you see all these tiny little projects that actually all together sort of transform your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're speaking at the MAC exhibition in April as part of the Made in Britain panel, with a complete focus on sustainability. So we'd encourage anyone that's listening to this to come and see, or visit us or catch up with us there. But that's absolutely in the spirit of that. So we're addressing 4 specific questions from 4 very, very diverse businesses. So there's us, there's a heat pump manufacturer, there's a beauty products. So very diverse, but we're all addressing the same questions around how can we make small changes? How can a business just starting its journey, make an impact? And Sean's point is absolutely right, that it's bite size, and it's starting with the small things and looking at, how you behave at the moment and where you can make small quick wins and where you can make more fundamental changes and what you might need to do that. And as we said, none of us are experts, and I will keep saying it because I really don't want anyone to think that we're preaching because we're definitely not. No. But we've done the bite-sized bits, and we've looked at our, cradle to cradle, if you like, approach, and where we can make the changes. And that's where we are on the journey. And we just actively would encourage all of you to work with us, talk to us, support us. And most importantly, my own personal request as an MD of Race and having an impact on the seating industry would be, please be open to be adaptable. Please, because our team are experts in what they do in seating design, and there's been an incredible amount of work on the form not foam, and we would love to have more conversation and encourage that, because I genuinely believe that will make the biggest difference in our industry.
And the more people that do it, I guess the more popular it becomes, and the impact we can have collectively. I think you look at something like packaging, where recycled plastic packaging wasn't commonplace. Now more so, obviously we don't use much at all, if any, in Race, but in the other companies there was no source of it recently, and now it's become popular because everyone goes there. And actually collectively, if we find these issues that we've got in our industry like foam, actually collectively, what can we do together instead of fighting against each other? Like you were saying earlier, Lucy, about standardizing things. Sustainability should be a standardization. It shouldn't really be our winning against others. We should get to a level where we're all sort of doing the same and pushing things forward and changing the industry for the better.
Absolutely. And even down to, when we go food shopping. If, you know, some of us use supermarkets, some don't. But, you know, nature provides its own packaging most of the time. We're adding to it necessarily. So I think, you know, for me, it's as simple as looking at things like that. You know, I saw someone showed me a picture of 2 corn on the cobs in their ears, you know, as they've just been picked, and 2 in a supermarket, load of packaging. And it's kind of, okay, that message wasn't lost on me, because it was really simple and it was really striking image, you know, a real clear visual of, well, nature is providing its own packaging. Why are we making an issue where there shouldn't be one? And I think if we can take those learnings into our businesses and apply that same thinking, then yeah, I think as a collective we can make a change far quicker. Because, you know, the sad thing is, as you said at the start, Sean, that the theatre report was in 2008 and we're no really further forward. And so I think now's the time, you know, now we're 2022. I would love for us in a year's time to come back and there's been a huge change in our industry.
Yeah. I think all we can ask is for you as customers to ask the questions, work with us, and we can help move forward.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks, Sean.